Workers' Union Numsa has met with Comair's management to discuss a way forward and to get feedback on the progress of securing funding. Last week, you'll remember the union had discussions with Comair CEO Glenn Orsmond, and they said they were dissatisfied with the answers that they received. And that was after the airline grounded its flights on British Airways and Kulula, citing a lack of funds. The matter can potentially, according to Numsa, result in the loss of over 1,200 direct jobs, thousands of other indirect jobs linked to Comair. So let's get you some insight into the latest meeting now. We're joined by Numsa's spokesperson, Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, via our video link this morning. Phakamile, I just want to clarify, good morning. Has the second meeting with Comair happened? I know you had a meeting with them last week as well.
Good morning, Michelle, and good morning to your viewers, and thank you for having me on your show. Yes, the meeting with Comair's business rescue practitioner, Richard Ferguson, took place yesterday.
Right.
It was a meeting with all stakeholders. So it was the business rescue practitioner, Glenn Orsmond was also at the meeting, the ER manager, and also other recognized unions were there.
So, from the first meeting where Numsa said you were dissatisfied with the answers, there was no clarity given on how much money was needed to get the airline back into the skies, etc., etc. Has anything changed?
Well, to be frank with you, Michelle, some of those questions we still don't have answers to. For example, the question on how much money the airline needs to get back into the skies. Richard Ferguson would not disclose how much funding they need in order to make themselves sustainable. He says that information is only for potential investors, and they would only reveal that information at that time. And we did express to him our dissatisfaction, not just with that answer, but also in general, the fact that there is a lack of transparency on the side of the business rescue practitioner, the fact that he does not want to fully bring us into his confidence, because it's very clear that the situation facing workers at Comair is quite dire. The picture that was painted yesterday was a very, very worrying picture, because effectively what Richard said is that the airline has weeks in order to find an investor, and if it cannot find an investor, then unfortunately it will be wound down.
Clarity on whether workers would be paid during this latest round of grounding of Comair, that was also an issue you raised in the first meeting. Did you get that assurance in that meeting yesterday?
So what we found out in the meeting is that unfortunately Comair cannot guarantee that workers' salaries will be paid for the month of June. They cannot guarantee that it will be able to pay benefits such as medical aid and other benefits. So what we are faced with here is a very real possibility that this airline could collapse. And what we stressed in the meeting was that it is important for the business rescue practitioner to work with all stakeholders, to work with labor, especially in trying to find an investor, because it is in all our collective interests to ensure that this airline does not collapse. We're talking about 1,200 jobs. That's 1,200 families who are going to be in crisis if Comair fails to take off. And in a country like ours, where you've got this expanding unemployment levels, these workers are unlikely to be absorbed in other jobs. So we will be frank. I mean, we don't want Richard Ferguson at all. We believe that Richard Ferguson, working with Glenn Orsmond, they are the reasons that this airline has collapsed. They have mismanaged this airline to the point where it is now. And to make matters worse, they are not, specifically the BRP, Richard Ferguson, is not being forthright about the best way forward for us to try and assist the organization.
1,200 direct jobs, and of course, as you say, Phakamile, thousands of other indirect jobs linked to Comair. Certainly a devastating situation for workers. But what does Numsa do now to get rid of, essentially, Glenn Orsmond and Richard Ferguson? How do you go about doing that if you do believe it's in the best interest of getting Comair back into the skies?
Well, I think for now, that's not something we're going to be able to do in the immediate future. what we are most concerned about is this issue of salaries. So what we've said, and we did propose this even in the meeting, we said to them that given that they cannot guarantee salaries for the short to medium term, the best thing that they can do right now is to approach the Department of Labor with our help, of course, as unions, to apply for a training layoff scheme so that whilst we're still trying to figure out a solution, workers can be placed on training layoff. That means that at least they would get paid some kind of remuneration while this situation is playing itself out. And that's something that Numsa will be driving, and starting from today, we are going to be making those applications. At the same time, we said that we would try our level best to see if we can also try and find an investor. We've done that in the past when SA Express was under business rescue and they were looking for an investor. Numsa and Saka did find an investor. So we would definitely make the efforts to see if, again, that would be possible in this situation. And having said that, we also said that in order for that to happen, we would need full disclosure from Comair management and the business rescue practitioner. And at least on that front, he said he would be willing to disclose, especially the information regarding how much money they need and all of those other types of information if we sign a non-disclosure agreement. Right. So we were able to find each other at least on that issue. But it's still, we still maintain that this airline would not be where it is if it had not been for Richard Ferguson and Glenn Orsmond. But for now, we are just going to have to work with them to ensure that at the very least workers get their salaries paid, and hopefully we can find a resolution in relation to finding an investor.
Yeah, certainly for the sake of workers. Glenn Orsmond, for his part, Phakamile, has been quite vocal about, or he's spoken out. He's done a couple of interviews just in the days following the grounding last week, saying and maintaining that Comair is profitable. He says Kalula is a brand that people love, and the airline does have the ability to be successful. It's so difficult to understand him saying that on the back of this voluntary grounding, citing, he says, high fuel prices and the Omicron-related lockdown as the reason for this financial stress that Comair is going through, this financial stress that other airlines have also been experiencing.
That's precisely the point, Michelle. I mean, this is why we say this airline is collapsing because of mismanagement. The very same circumstances that Glenn is citing as difficulties for Comair are the same circumstances facing all the other airlines, and yet they're managing. So the problem here is not the situation. The problem is the management. It's as simple as that. And for us, this is why we say that they are to blame. They must take responsibility. This is an airline that was started in the 1940s. And throughout that entire time, it weathered many storms. And along comes Glenn Orsmond, along comes Richard Ferguson, and now we find ourselves where this airline has been voluntarily grounded. On top of that, they have done the most work, both of them, Glenn Orsmond and Richard Ferguson, at destroying the brand of Comair. The manner in which they announced this voluntary grounding was shocking, badly planned. They did not consult trade unions. They did not prepare the public properly. I mean, literally hours before they announced the grounding, they were selling tickets. It's quite disgraceful. And one could even argue or raise questions about whether their behavior was ethical, because how do you continue to sell tickets when you know that you're going to ground the airline a couple of hours later? So these were all things that we raised in our meetings, expressing our total dissatisfaction with the manner in which they've run this airline, and particularly with the manner in which they've destroyed, in our view, the brand of this airline. But again, these are things that we're going to have to work on. Our focus right now is to get workers paid, firstly, and secondly, to help find an investor.
Phakamile, we're out of time, but what you've just brought out is such an important issue, because even if Comair does get back into the skies, it's going to take a lot to rebuild the trust on the part of consumers.
Absolutely. The trust index between consumers and Comair is definitely broken, and a lot of work would need to be done to restore that trust.
Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, let me thank you for your time this morning. Numsa spokesperson giving us an update there on the second meeting held with Comair CEO Glenn Orsmond and Richard Ferguson, who is the business rescue practitioner there. That airline remains grounded and says it's still looking for funding.